Welcome back, Netrunner fans, to part 2 of my Liberated Mind review. In this part, we're going to be looking at all the Corp cards in the pack. First up is a new piece of ice for HB. This is Brainstorm. It's 9 to res, it's 4 influence, it's a 2 strength Century AP. When the runner encounters Brainstorm, it gains subroutine do 1 brain damage for each card in the runner's grip for the remainder of this run. I've wanted to see something out of HB like this for quite some time. This is a really brutal anti-face checking HB ice, and unlike a lot of the best HB ice, it's not a Bioroid, so the runner's not going to be able to just click through it. A lot of people have compared this to Kamainu, and I sort of feel like that's a bad comparison. Yeah, they have some similar abilities, like they both have the when encountered thing, but Kamainu is 5 to res, whereas this is 9. That's going to have them play a very different role. Kamainu is more of like a mid-range ice. Brainstorm is going to be one of a handful of the absolute most expensive ice in your deck. 9 to res is really hard for most decks to res. Even the big Glacier, big economy decks are going to have trouble resing this. And for that reason, I think the dream scenario where the runner face checks this thing with a full hand is almost never going to occur. The other thing about this is at 9 to res, it's not really going to be that big of attacks. They're going to be able to break it with Mimic, and if they just go down to like 2 or 3 cards in hand, which they could pretty easily do against most HB decks, they're going to pretty easily be able to break this for 2 or 3, and paying 9 to res, not really worth it in that situation. So I like this card a lot. I think this is the type of thing that the game should have. Really dangerous, really punishing face check ice. And I like that concept. I'm also really happy to see when encountered effects on ice that are not NBN, which is something I've talked about in a lot of my videos. But I think overall, this is going to be too expensive for a lot of HB decks to be considering. Next up, we have another piece of ice for HB. This is Ravana 1.0. It's 3 to res, it's 1 influence, it's a 5 strength Code Gate Bioroid. The runner can spend clicks to break any subroutine on it, that's the Bioroid part. Then it has 2 subs that are both the same. Resolve a subroutine on another piece of resed Bioroid ice. I think I'm willing to say that this is hands down the best Bioroid tribal type of card that we've ever seen. Not only does this interact really well with having lots of Bioroids, I think it's also going to be playable in a wider variety of HB Glacier style decks. The big thing is, if you're playing an ice-oriented HB deck, you're almost certainly playing Bioroids. And you're almost certainly playing, I would say, at least like 6 Bioroids. So I think it's going to be pretty easy to include 1 or 2 of these in any deck that's playing Eli's or Ichis or just stuff like that. And this is, I think, a really good piece of ice in terms of its stats. It's a little conditional in that you have to have another res piece of Bioroid for it to work. But outside of that, which I think that's not a huge requirement, it's going to be a 3 to res, 5 strength Code Gate with 2 subs. It's pretty hard to beat that. I can definitely see putting 1 or 2 of these in your standard food coats kind of deck. But I also think that it might be worth pursuing a very Bioroid heavy ice setup and playing like 3 of these. I like this a lot. I think this is a really good way to do ice that require other ice. I think this is a lot better than positional stuff that we've seen, like the Chum type. Next up, we have a 3-for-1 agenda for Jinteki. This is Dedicated Neural Net. It's an initiative and it's Psi subtype. The first time there is a successful run on HQ each turn, you and the runner play the Psi game. If you win, you choose which cards the runner accesses from HQ for the remainder of this run. I feel pretty split on this. On one hand, I really like the Psi game and if you win, you get to choose the cards at a HQ. I think that's a much better sort of punishment effect for winning the Psy game than some of them we've seen in the past. I think Caprice Nisei is the biggest violator. That one is just so uninteresting when you win. You just completely shut them out. This is going to give them the opportunity to access, but you might be able to throw them into a snare or something like that. And that just, I think, in general, is a more interesting way of doing the Psy game results than having it be a very binary, like, you either win or lose. It's also worth putting out there that this is another source of Psy games for Nisei Division, and I've said for a while that we've been creeping very slowly towards that deck being playable. I think you're going to need some source of a ton of Psy games, and this could potentially be that if there was an incentive for the runner running HQ a lot. I could also see maybe this effect being kind of interesting in PE, because a lot of times with PE, you're not defending HQ that thoroughly. This would be a good way to throw them into nasty stuff you have in your hand. With all that said, this is yet another card in a huge long list of not only Jinteki but other faction agendas where you wonder why this ability is attached to a 3-for-1. This is a really interesting ability. This defensive effect might be playable on like an upgrade, a piece of ice, or an asset, but when it's attached to a 3-for-1, I see virtually no reason to play this. It's extremely difficult to put 3-for-1s in most decks, and for some kind of marginal defensive effect that only works on HQ, I absolutely am not screwing up my agenda mix just to have that effect. If we're going to have 3-for-1s that have some sort of ability that's their key effect, that ability needs to be something that's very hard to replicate with other card effects. It needs to be really unique and powerful. Something like Chronos Project. I don't really think this is good enough. I don't think as a 3-for-1 this is going to see any play, but I really like the effect and wish it was on something else. Next up, we have a piece of ice for Jinteki. This is Chitana. It's a 4-to-res, 2 influence, 3 strength Century AP Psi. It has 2 subroutines. The first is each player gains 2 credits. The second is play the Psi game. If you win, do 1 net damage for each card in the runner's grip. Well, here's another Nisei Division piece of ice, I guess. But I think this thing is pretty solid outside of that context as well. The big thing about this is that first sub, that's going to be something they're probably going to let fire most of the time. And it's going to be a nice sort of income drip, even if it does give the runner the credits as well. Now the second sub is really the meat of the card, and it's got this sort of Kamainu kind of effect, except it's all consolidated into one sub and it's based on a Psi game. Now that's going to mean that this is going to be easier to break than Kamainu is. A lot of times with Kamainu, they're going to have at least 2 cards, they're going to have to break 2 or 3 subs, and this, they're probably only going to have to break that second sub with something like Mimic. So this is going to cost them -1 credits. You'll also get 2 if they just run into it and break the second sub with Mimic. Whereas something like Kamainu is going to cost a lot more. Tsurugi, the same deal. It's worth noting that this has 3 strength, so it's not going to die as easily as Kamainu would to a Parasite. It's also potentially going to be better against a low strength Icebreaker, assuming they play something like that. I don't know, this thing's okay. I think this is good enough. I think that this will see play, at least as a few of, in a wider range of decks. It's just a nice mid-range piece of ice that I think is going to be worth the kind of pop-up window thing with this potential to hit him for a bunch of damage. Next up, we have an agenda for NBN. This is Puppet Master. It's a 5-for-3. It's an initiative subtype. Whenever the runner makes a successful run, you may place 1 advancement token on a card that can be advanced. If you've ever heard me talk about 5-for-3s, the main thing I say is that generally their power level of their effects is too low. Now, I think this one is definitely ramping up the power level from some that we've seen recently, but I very strongly question, why is this NBN? To me, this seems vastly more like a Wayland 5 for 3, especially now that we've seen Gagarin rising as this, like, big, wide, horizontal, the runner's going to make lots of successful runs type of deck. I mean, yeah, you could put this in like a near-Earth hub or that style of horizontal deck, but why would you want to put a 5 for 3 in that deck? If you're going to play a 5 for 3, it's going to be Global Food Initiative or nothing, because Food Initiative is only 2 in the runner's score area. I don't think you're going to want to risk them getting 3 points all in one agenda just to have some effect that you might occasionally be able to pull off, even if it's powerful. I like this effect. It just, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on a 5 for 3 out of NBN, and for that reason, I don't anticipate it seeing a whole lot of play. Next up, we have a new piece of ice for NBN. This is Waver. It's 5 to res, 2 influence. It's a 5 strength code gate tracer. It has 1 subroutine. Trace 5. If successful, the runner reveals his or her grip. Trash each of those cards with a play or install cost equal to or less than the amount by which your trace exceeded his or her link strength. I really like playing up the surveillance aspect of NBN, and I really like these effects that allow us to look at the runner's grip. That interacts well with effects that allow us to name cards, like Salem's Hospitality or Targeted Marketing. I also think that this fits well in an area of the card pool that NBN could use more stuff for, which is like mid-range ice that have quality effects and are kind of expensive to break. Pretty much only David deals with this thing for really cheap, and the fact that you're almost always going to get something on the trace, even if you only win by like 1 or 2, that's going to wipe out a lot of cards. I like this design a lot. I don't think it's absolutely great, but I think that it's good enough to see some play if you're already playing like Targeted Marketing or Salem's Hospitality, or if you just need a mid-range code gate that has an effect in the runner's hand. Next up is a new operation for NBN. This is Exchange of Information. It's 0 to play, it's 2 influence, it's gray ops. Play only if the runner is tagged. Swap an agenda in your score area with an agenda in the runner's score area. This is pretty obviously good, and I expect this to see play right out of the pack. The big thing about this is you can swap a 1-pointer, which we have in spades with this deck, breaking news as well as 15 minutes. We can swap that for a bigger agenda, maybe like a Global Food Initiative, maybe even potentially the Puppet Master or Restructured Data Pool, one of those big 5 for 3s that not only is worth the points, but it has some effect. And when you consider also that breaking news is a way to enable this, like you can score the breaking news, get them tagged, and then fire this, and all you really have to do is have the breaking news installed at the beginning of your turn to do it, that's really strong. It's also pretty amusing that you could score the 15 minutes, and then you could swap it using Exchange of Information, and then reshuffle the 15 minutes back in your deck. It's kind of insult to injury, if you ask me. The obvious downside with this card is that they have to be tagged, so that's going to make it really hard to play outside of NBN. I basically expect this to only see play in NBN. I think Sync definitely has a lot of potential with this because of the ability with tags. I think you're probably going to be playing mid-season or something like that as a supplemental tag effect, and I think this is probably not going to be the only thing you do that's anti-tags. You're probably going to have other tag punishment as well. I really like this card a lot. I think this is a huge step in the right direction for play only if the runner is tagged type effects. And I think that this swapping the agenda thing, more stuff interacting with the score area, is something that's really positive direction for the game to head. A lot of people have compared this to Turntable. That's an obvious comparison. But I think that this effect is way stronger on the Corp side of the game, since it's much harder to make 3 points with the Corp than it is to steal 3 points with the runner. And for that reason, this card actually incentivizes you to play 5 for 3s that I think otherwise would be really hard to play. Now, I think most of the time you're going to end up probably just using global food, but at least there's that little bit of incentive to play big agendas that we haven't seen in the past. Next up is a new piece of ice for Wayland. This is Red Tape. It's 2 to res, 1 influence, it's a 5 strength code gate. It has 1 subroutine. All ice has +3 strength for the remainder of this run. For whatever reason, every 4 to 6 months, we have to prove that Chum is still a bad card by printing some ice like this that does nothing as the innermost piece. And I don't know what else to say. All ice like this are bad. They're not going to see play because they don't do anything as the innermost piece. If you draw it early in the game, it's going to be a liability. If you draw it later in the game, they're going to just kill the ice behind it. And this just isn't good. I think this one is particularly bad because all it does is give strength. And strength's like the easiest thing to overcome. If they have David or a Data Sucker, which is like every deck, then I'm pretty sure they're going to deal with this without a whole lot of trouble. This would be so much more interesting if it said turn instead of run, because then if you ran into it on one server, it would give all of the ice on the next server +3 strength. That would make it a lot more powerful. It would still rely on multiple ice to work, but it wouldn't have the stupid positioning thing that I think absolutely ruins cards like this. I don't know why we need to keep reprinting Chums. They're all bad, and they're not going to work. Until we fix ice destruction, stuff like this is not going to see play. Next up is an operation for Wayland. This is Consulting Visit. It's 2 to play, it's 3 influence, it's Alliance, and it's a double. The Alliance part is, this card costs 0 influence if you have 6 or more non-Alliance Wayland cards in your deck. And the double part is, as an additional cost to play this operation, spend a click, search R&D for an operation and play it, paying all costs, shuffle R&D. So the most obvious thing to say about this is that since it's Alliance, it's going to get tutored up by Mumbad City Hall. And that card is definitely the core engine of both Industrial Genomics as well as the Gagarin decks that we've seen floating around. This as a one-of in those decks, I think is going to be really, really strong. You're going to be able to tutor up a whole host of operations, one-of silver bullet kind of things, economy effects, etc. Now, I also think that this has a lot of potential in a pretty standard Scorched Earth oriented deck. The biggest thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of times the tag mechanism is mid-season replacements, and this is going to make it so that you only have to play one of those, and that's going to free up a ton of influence. I think it's kind of weird that this is an Alliance card, but I definitely like giving Wayland more tutors. I think that that's like an area of the card pool that they've been focusing on Wayland, and I think that's a really good thing to try to bolster the faction. This is definitely going to fit in the standard Scorched Earth style, and I actually think it's going to be more powerful in that than it is with any sort of Mumbad City Hall shenanigans. The final card in the pack is a neutral piece of ice. It's called Vanilla. It's 0 to res, it's 0 strength, it's 0 influence, it's a barrier, and it has 1 subroutine, which is End of the Run. I tell you what, this card showed Paperwall what's up. It's over, Paperwall. So all those paper walls that you were playing in your deck, you better switch those things out because Vanilla is in town. This card's so logical, it needed to exist. I'm happy that this now exists. I think having more generic, absolutely low-end ice is something that the game could use. And I've been really, really happy with what we're seeing out of neutral ice lately. Namely, we've been seeing lots of useful neutral ice. Between Cobra, Assassin, and now this, there have been a lot of really good gap-filling just generically decent ice that fit a variety of roles in your ice lineup. I don't anticipate this seeing a whole ton of play, but I think it definitely will, especially in like a fast advanced deck or a deck that really just needs some cheap gear check type effect to keep the runner out of your server. This is a logical card. I'm glad this now exists, and I anticipate this seeing a little bit of play. That's going to do it for my Liberated Mind review. There are a lot of exciting cards in this pack. This is probably one of the most fun-filled, toy-filled packs that we've had in quite some time, and while there are a few stinkers, I think that there's definitely quite a few playables. We saw a lot of cards filling in gaps of kind of underexploited aspects of card pool, whether it be the Cygame thing, the click manipulation with Shaper, the empty hand thing out of Anarch. There's generally a lot of decent ideas going on with the designs here, and I think overall the quality of the designs continues to increase. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and leave me a comment and let me know which cards you agree or disagree about. Maybe you're a huge fan of red tape. I want to hear about that. I'll see you soon for some more Netrunner stuff.